If you consider yourself passionate about music, then I want to challenge the way that you might think about something. In the same way that I was challenged in 2022, 2023, definitely, when I was forced to face a very long-held bias, a bias that I would hold up against a certain category of band. And if you're a late year boomer, Generation X, maybe one of the first years of the millennials, then there's a really good possibility that you hold this exact same bias. And I do think the bias is unique to those of us who grew up in a certain period of time. For example, I don't think future generations that this bias will be as present, which I'll explain here shortly. Now, there are people who are just as passionate about sports as some are about music, but I've never heard somebody say something like, the current Pittsburgh Steelers are not legitimate because Terry Bradshaw and the 1978 starting lineup are no longer part of the team. Every year, a sports team will iterate. They'll field a new team in pursuit of a new championship. And we don't ever question the legitimacy of that. In fact, we kind of expect it. But yet when a band iterates, even when that band is continuing to put out new music, when the lineup begins to change, you'll start hearing people question the legitimacy of it, call them a cover band or call them fakers, tribute band, it's not legitimate anymore. And we really only do that to bands that use some type of metaphor as their name. So, for example, if Bryan Adams changed his lineup of musicians, I don't think anybody would complain. Even if you take somebody like Pat Benatar, if her husband and guitarist Neil Giraldo stopped performing with her, it'd be sad to people like me who really love and appreciate Spider. But people would still buy the tickets. They'd still show up to see Pat. I don't think anybody would go, well, Pat Benatar is no longer legitimate. That's something that we only seem to do to groups that perform under a band name. And it's something that would really start to become more common in the 1960s. We'd begin applying this kind of flawed, inconsistent emotional logic to bands. Because what would happen is, prior to artists like Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, the Beatles, more times than not, an artist would actually record a song written by somebody else. Throughout the 1960s, we started seeing more rock bands recording songs written by a member of that band. So we started to apply this logic that the band or the members that we saw touring in support of that song, who were members of the band, we assume that they must be the ones recording the music. And sometimes that's the case, but a lot of times there are studio musicians being used in the recording of that album. So now, where's our emotional loyalty being applied? To the one that we see on stage performing in support of the album, or the one who is actually in the studio, unknown, responsible for actually recording the song? So the logic begins to break down. Now, over the years, we've allowed bands to iterate with great success. So take Journey. They would have success under Greg Rowley, success under Steve Perry. The 90125 era of Yes would bring on a whole new and different category of fans than those that were part of the prior iterations of Yes. The Eagles would find success under different iterations of musicians. Jefferson Airplane, Jefferson Starship, Genesis, the prog years versus Genesis, the pop years. So we would allow these bands to iterate with success. Now here's the next challenge. Once you slap the word classic onto a band, once it becomes classic rock, it's kind of like they become nothing more than a photo and a photo album, a testament to a memory. They get locked away in a glass case, like an exhibit in a museum, something to be just stared at and reflected upon. Now, this is an extreme example, but hopefully you'll understand the point that I'm trying to make. Stevie Ray Vaughan once lived to give this guitar life, but now it's an exhibit. And as I thought about this, I began to wonder, would he be happy or sad knowing that the thing that he loved is no longer out there creating new music? It's no longer out there forging new connections with an audience. And the more that I thought about that, the more I found myself realizing that I actually would like to see that guitar in the hands of a musician that can appreciate it, that can actually play it. And because in doing so, it'd be kind of like hearing Stevie again. And again, it's an extreme example, but this is what we do to a lot of bands, especially once we call them classic. We lock them in a case, turn them into an exhibit, freezing them in time. And one of the things that occurred to me as I really started thinking about this is I found myself no longer looking at a band name as a metaphor or something representing a lineup of musicians, but a band name came to represent an expected sound, quality, a type of experience. So for example, You go to see the current iteration of Lynyrd Skynyrd, not because you're expecting to see a free-form jazz concert. You go because you're expecting to hear the hits, but really you're expecting that anything they play is going to have a southern rock vibe to it. You go to see the current iteration of Yes, because you're expecting to hear the classics, but you're really expecting that anything they play will have a prog rock vibe to it. It's going to have great musicianship, very complex arrangements. So suddenly a band name begins to actually transcend the members itself. It becomes an experience. You go because you do want to connect with any remaining members of the band that were part of the music that you love, but you're going because there's an expected sound and quality of experience. And that's kind of very freeing and kind of cool when you really think about it. I'll share with you one last thought, which is we as music fans, we can be both finicky and very hypocritical at the same time. So for example, we want the younger generation to celebrate, to connect with, to validate the bands and the music that we loved. And when they don't, we get insulted. Yet at the same time, when the bands that we claim to love try to iterate and create new music, or they have lineup changes, well, we get insulted and offended by that too, and we really don't support them along the line. And if we want these bands to be able to connect with a new, younger audience, then sometimes that requires new music, and with new music comes a new lineup. So it's a complex relationship. I'm not expecting to change anybody's mind. I do hope maybe to plant the seed, the same seed that, got planted in me over the last couple of years, and maybe it'll cause you to start rethinking really the relationship and the kind of challenges and obstacles that we're putting on a lot of these bands. Because over the past couple of years, we have the Guess Who, Yes, Chicago, Styx, Alan Parsons, Steve Lukather, Kansas, all these bands that put out incredible music that deserves to be listened to. So as always, I know it's a very touchy subject, but let me know your thoughts. And along that lines, if you can see the Guess Who, I would definitely recommend checking them out, because you've never really thought of the Guess Who as one of the great vocal bands, but it's exciting because now they are. They're probably one of the best vocal harmony rock bands touring right now. Their new album is just incredible. Their live show is phenomenal. If you have the opportunity to go and see them and to connect with Gary Peterson and hear him tell the stories, it's a great experience. So as always, let me know your thoughts.